So I've been doing a really fun little project recently, trying to figure out what it is that people think of when they hear the word science. I'm hoping to come to some hypotheses about what in general people think science is, and not all of them can really articulate a full-fledged definition of science, but pretty much everybody can free associate with the word. So I've asked people on Facebook and forums and dinner parties. That's definitely the most fun. At dinner parties and social gatherings and things, what I'll do is I'll just get everyone's attention and say, we're going to play a game where everybody free associates with the word science. Just say the very first thing you hear when you think of the word science and just keep going. And then I write it down. And when it goes well, I get so much information that I have to recruit other people to help me write. And it just gets really crazy and a lot of fun. So I've ended up with a lot of information to analyze. And I've managed to break down just about everything people say into 4 different categories. And they're really basic categories, and it's pretty reliable. It happens just about every time. The biggest category is technology. People say things like laser and EEG and sometimes automobile or rocket ship, smartphone, medicine, things like that. And then next people talk about, well, they don't really talk about, but they mention subject matter, and almost all of them say nature. There's not a really huge group of concepts that people associate with the subject matter of science, the way that they do with technology. They pretty much always say the natural world or something like that. So even though it's not a huge part of the information, it's the most reliable thing, probably the most, you can be certain every single time you play this game that somebody is going to say nature or the natural world or maybe the universe. And then we have knowledge. And usually it's along the lines of subject matter. Usually they'll just say knowledge. Every now and then they will like name little facts and things that they remember from science class, physics or chemistry, or even really early science class. So they'll say like Avogadro's number is 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd. I don't think anyone's actually said that, but that sort of thing. Or they might say, tell me the difference between stalactites and stalagmites, or ice crystals have 6 sides, something like that. And then finally, you get a lot of people naming methods. A lot of the time they'll just say the scientific method, or they might say questioning, or test, things along those lines, or rationality, applying rationality. That one's really cool. People say that one a lot. And so what does this tell us? This tells us that regardless of whether or not someone can come up with a coherent definition of science themselves, and regardless of whether or not a definition that they can come up with is correct or useful or whatever, these are the things that they think about when they hear science. And I want to propose that none of these things is actually science. They're thinking about things that are related to science, things that share a family resemblance, and that resemblance, I think, is science. But science is not technology, it's not knowledge, it's not subject matter, and it's not methodology. And here's why. For science to be any of those things, it would have to be metaphysically non-well-founded. That is, it would have to be dependent upon itself for its own existence, or it would have to have a definition that is circular. So for instance, with technology, what is technology? Technology is the product of science. Specifically, it's what happens when we apply the knowledge that we gain through science, so that to our daily lives, to are tools and things that help our lives be better in various ways. That's what technology is. So technology is the product of science, and that means that if we're going to define science as technology, we have a circular definition. We have science is the something of science. And for that definition to make sense, we first have to define science because it's in the definition. And that's what I mean by non-well-founded. You just have to continuously redefine science every single time to apply that definition if you want to explain anything with it. We have the same problem with subject matter, because what subject matter? Well, the subject matter of science. That has the same form of science is the X of science. It doesn't work logically. Furthermore, with subject matter in particular, people say nature, and the more you try to define nature, the more rigorous you are about constructing that concept, the more you find nature is everything. Nothing isn't nature. So you're trying to use the word in a definition to explain things, and anything that means everything means nothing practically, because you can't, it's not a particular set of things to which other things can be related. It doesn't have any explanatory power. So it doesn't make any sense, and it's not useful to define science as the subject matter of science. Then we have knowledge. Is science knowledge? This is a little bit more difficult. First of all, it's not a very useful definition, if only because knowledge is static. It just kind of sits there. It doesn't actually get us anywhere. But that's not the main problem. The problem is which knowledge. And the only really good way to answer that is the knowledge gained through science. So again, we have the circularity. But even if that's not a problem, I mean, let's try and think about other sources of knowledge, other things that can give us knowledge. Well, I can't think of any. Maybe divine inspiration. And I kind of want to say that if divine inspiration were actually a reliable way to gain knowledge, real, justified, true belief, you know, things that actually correspond to the world, then divine inspiration would be part of scientific methodology. And that means, again, we have a definition that doesn't really do any explaining because it's just too big. It doesn't section off anything. So it's either circular or useless, or probably both. And then we have methodology. And with methodology, this comes a lot closer to being a really useful definition, but it's still circular, because which methodology? There are methods for doing an awful lot of things besides gaining knowledge, or besides, you know, whatever it is that science does. So, you know, if we want to say that the techniques of watercolor painting are not part of science, our only real justification for excluding them is they're not used in the pursuit of science. So science isn't the methodology of science. So to recap, science is not the product of science, it isn't the knowledge gained through science, it isn't the subject matter of science, and it isn't the methodology of science. Here's what I think science actually is. And I'm not going to argue for this definition because I don't want the video to get too long here. Really, all I wanted to tell you about was what science isn't, so that I can dispel some misconceptions. But I'm going to go ahead and present it just so you can start to think about how this definition differs from all of these other things we think about when we hear the word science. And later on, I'll go ahead and really talk a whole lot more about why I think this is the right definition of science. So here we go. Science is a quest to become less wrong about the world. Science is a quest to become less wrong about the world. And that'll do for now.